Babylonian imperial creation story was a story of might makes right. The world was created by military victory, by overwhelming victory against another god. The world is created by the killing of a god and the victory of one god over others. The imperial creation story was told to support the imperial claims of Babylon. But we have a different creation story. In Genesis 1, we get the story of creation told from the underside of empire, from those who are on the bottom of the imperial order. We said in our last session that a fundamental difference between the Babylonian story and the Genesis story is that in the Babylonian story, human beings are created to be slaves, to do the grunt work of the gods, to toil in endless labor. Genesis 1 presents a picture of human beings as created in the image of God, male and female, so they can rule in the earth, so they can govern. It is a story that empowers human beings to be kings and queens in the universe. But the power of Genesis 1 is a very different kind of power than the power of domination that we see in the Babylonian creation story. In the Genesis creation story, the world is created not out of divine combat, not by the murder of one god by another god. Rather, creation takes place because God speaks a word. When God began creating the sky and the earth, the world was formless void. The term in Hebrew is tohu vavohu. It's a word pair. Tohu means wild stuff, wilderness. Bohu is a word that appears only 3 times in the Hebrew Bible, and it always appears in connection with tohu. It's a word that sounds like tohu, and I think it means something like tohu squared. If tohu is wild stuff, tohu vavohu is really wild stuff. When God began creating the sky and the earth, the universe was just totally out of control. It was deep, it was dark, it was watery, it was windy, chaos, tohu vavohu. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God separated the light from the darkness, and there was evening and morning, day 1. Then God said, "Let there be a firmament." And the Hebrew word there means something like a hammered out surface. The ancients believed that the sky was a solid dome. And this is the picture that we have here in Genesis. We're borrowing here from the Babylonian story. Remember, in the Babylonian story, Marduk split Tiamat's corpse in 2, and part of her corpse he made into the dome of the sky. Now, here in the Genesis story, we don't have the death of a god and the corpse being made into the sky. We have God simply speaking a word, and the firmament is created. The firmament, the expanse, the hammered out surface, is to separate the waters above from the waters below. And there was evening and morning, day 2. Then God said, "Let the waters beneath the surface of the sky be gathered into one place so that dry land may appear." And it happened just that way. And God called the dry land earth. And God deputized the earth to bring forth all kinds of vegetation. And God looked at it and said, "Oh, this is good." And there was evening and morning, day 3. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the the sky in the firmament of the heavens. And so God created the greater light for the daytime and the lesser light and the stars to mark the nighttime skies and to serve as markers of seasons and times. And God looked at that and God said, this is good. There was evening and morning, day 4. Then God said, let there be sky creatures winging across the surface of the sky, and let the seas bring forth sea creatures to swarm and swim in the sea. And it happened just that way. And God said, this is good. And there was evening and morning, day 5. And then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures, both domesticated and wild, and creeping things that creep on the surface of the land. And it happened just that way. And then God said, let's create a human being in our own image, in our own likeness, so that they can rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and the creatures of the land. So God created a human being, male and female. God created them. And God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and rule it. Now, this comes to a kind of climax in the story, not the final climax, but a kind of climax in the story. God creates human beings in God's own image. And as we said in our last session, the Hebrew syntax is very clear here. Human beings are created in God's own image so they can rule in the earth. Now, rulership has been somewhat problematic through the centuries because human beings often have ruled in the imperial fashion, have ruled as if domination, as if violence, as if dominating control is the way that we properly rule. But human beings created in the image of God are to rule in the earth as God rules in the universe. And that's reflected very clearly in this story. God rules not by dominating, but God rules with joy and delight and a sense of abundance. Now, this is really underlined in this story for us by the very use of the word to create. In this story, there are 2 words that are normally translated create or make, and they're used kind of interchangeably. The word that we normally translate as create is a word in Hebrew, bara, B-A-R-A, and then a little apostrophe on the end. Bara is a word, it means to create, and it's a word that only applies to God. So when God is the only one who can bara something. Now there's another word that's used here in Genesis 1, and it's used interchangeably with bara, and that's the word asa. It would be like A-S-A-H. Asa is a word that means to make. God can make things, and so can human beings. But only God can bara. Only God can create. Now, this word bara is interesting. It has a secondary meaning that is particularly relevant to this story of creation. In Hebrew, the way you make words is you start out with 3 consonants, and then you add prefixes and suffixes, and you fiddle around with the vowels, and you can create nouns or verbs or adjectives, and that's what we have with bara. This word bara, used elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, has a very definite meaning. Bara means not only to create, it means to be fat. To be fat. This is the word that appears in Genesis 41, in Pharaoh's famous dream, where Pharaoh dreams that there are 7 fat cows who come up out of the Nile River, followed by 7 puny cows. And of course, the 7 fat cows symbolize 7 years of incredible prosperity and bounty in the crops. The 7 skinny cows symbolize famine. The word that's used there for the 7 fat cows is the word bara. It's a variation of the word bara. In the Hebrew Bible, unlike this sick culture in which you and I live, to be fat was a good thing. I say, let's get back to the Bible. Fatness connotes health and prosperity and wealth. To be fat is good. The use of the word bara in Genesis 1 to describe creation is appropriate on a number of levels. Creation is presented in this story as the progressive movement from watery chaos to the emergence of solid stuff. Creation is presented as kind of like churning butter. You churn, and then the fats, the good stuff, the rich stuff bubbles up to the top of the surface of the liquid. Bara is appropriate in this story for another reason as well. God is creating in this story a world that is teeming with life, a world that is fundamentally abundant. In Genesis 1, you cannot think about creation without thinking about prosperity, without thinking about health and wealth and abundance. God creates a world of abundant life where there is more than enough for everyone and everything to not only survive but to thrive. Now, this is also underlined in the story by a litany that runs throughout the story.